The first time I heard him say it, I was halfway through restoring an authentication failover in a part of the system none of them even knew existed. She's just expensive overhead, the CEO said, like he was ordering a damn latte. I didn't flinch, just finished typing the last command and watched the node handshake go green. If I dropped dead at my desk, the platform would keep breathing for about 9 hours. Then it would start coughing blood. But sure, I'm overhead. Nobody ever asks who handles the integrity checks at 3 a.m. when a server in the Iowa cluster goes belly up, or who rewrote the load balancer script during a regional outage so clients never even noticed. That's the thing about infrastructure. You only remember it exists when it fails. And I don't fail, not out loud. They don't know that every backup route, every license validation, every obscure legacy API still running because someone up top won't approve migration. All of it runs through my blueprint, not metaphorically. I mean literally. There's a 118-page document buried in the compliance drive labeled Failover Root Auth Escrow. Nobody's opened it in 4 years. I know that because I built the audit trail too. Hey, quick thing before I go deeper. 97% of you listen to these stories without subscribing. If you like hearing about what happens when people underestimate the quiet ones, hit that like button and subscribe. It really keeps this going. Anyway, I keep my head down. Always have. You learn to do that in companies run by men who wear Patagonia vests indoors and call themselves visionaries because they once fired someone on a Zoom call while eating sushi. I wear flats, blend in, document everything. 2 weeks before it all blew up, I heard the same CEO tell the board we needed to trim the fat. He didn't say my name, but he didn't have to. I've been in tech long enough to know what that means. No client exposure, no patent on my name, just uptime, stability, and ghost work. That's target practice. I smiled in that meeting. Not because it was funny, but because I'd already moved the core license validators to a separate node. One no one else had credentials for. Biometric-only access, and guess what? Mine's the only print that matches. No drama, no threats. I didn't even argue. I just stayed late that night and updated a few protocols. Removed myself from one group, added myself to another, left behind one harmless-sounding file called dragonfly.root.patch. Nobody noticed? Nobody ever does. That's the comfort zone I lived in. Quiet, invisible, surrounded by men who confused my silence for obedience. I wasn't waiting to be saved. I was waiting for them to make the mistake, and they did. They brought me in like it was a dentist appointment. Cold fluorescent lights, HR rep with a stack of manila folders pretending to care. The CEO didn't even show, just a pre-recorded message on a looped Teams call, in the spirit of strategic realignment. Blah blah synergy, cost savings, efficiency. I sat there while some junior HR puppet told me my role would be sunsetting in 30 days. Not terminated, not redundant. Sunsetting. Like I was a goddamn app icon. She slid a severance packet across the table with the kind of pity I reserve for pigeons stuck in revolving doors. No exit interview necessary, she said. Like my silence was a gift they could unwrap and then discard. I didn't blink, didn't ask questions, just signed where they wanted me to, except one line. I tapped the System Asset Transition Addendum and asked if we'd be reviewing technical handoff protocols. She looked confused. Well, since your position isn't client-facing, we weren't planning a formal knowledge transfer. I nodded like that made perfect sense. Sure, who needs a knowledge transfer for the one person who understands how the service mesh authorizes internal routing during a cascading failover? Who designed the watchdog scripts that bypass AWS outages without alert fatigue? Who literally owns the biometric handshake for the license escrow key? Yeah, let's just wing it. I requested a full offboarding access log for my records. Said it was for compliance purposes, which was only half a lie. I watched her scribble it down like she had any idea what that meant. She asked if there was anything I needed during my transition. I said, yes. Leave my VPN credentials active for the full 30 days. Some of the automation scripts are time sensitive. She nodded. probably thinking I was just being thorough. They didn't realize that in every major version update, I'd included a redundancy layer only I knew how to navigate. Because when you're told for years that your work is invisible, you start hiding things where only the shadows can reach. The week after the meeting, I kept working like nothing happened. Pushed a few commits, approved 2 vendor patches, logged into the legacy cluster twice, and ran something called DFLY Heartbeat in the background. Nobody noticed. I got invited to one final compliance sync with the CTO, which I found hilarious, considering he once called my codebase paranoid spaghetti. At that meeting, I sat quietly while he skimmed over the infrastructure audit summary like it was a BuzzFeed quiz. Said everything looked resilient. I agreed. And then, at 2:17 a.m. that Friday, I pushed the last script I'd ever write for that company. It was 48 lines long and did exactly one thing. It rerouted fallback authorization to a dormant node tagged tran eroute. No alerts, no shutdowns, just a quiet bypass, waiting. They thought they were cutting fat, but they were carving out the spine. It was supposed to be my last week. One final lap through the wreckage before the wreck noticed it was hollow. I got looped into a vendor compliance review because no one else on the platform team could explain the system logs without Googling half the acronyms. I should have said no, but I wanted to see something, wanted to know how stupid they were willing to be. The CTO, Greg, the same man who once told me redundancy protocols were optional if the platform's resilient, was now leading the review. Vendors from our third-party cloud integrator, insurance liaison, and federal contract audit partner were all dialed in. Questions came fast, sharp, too technical for Greg's usual smoke show. One of the vendor engineers asked directly, "How is your internal fallback license resolution handled if biometric auth fails mid-cycle?" Greg blinked, smiled, changed the subject. That was my answer. So while he fumbled through jargon like modular escalability and dynamic encryption trees, not a thing by the way, I quietly logged into the audit node. Not the flashy dashboard, not the canned reports, the real backend, the one labeled SysAuth Infrastructure Live, where things still speak, bash and SSH keys matter more than business cards. I typed 6 commands, each one precise, each one logged but unflagged. Then I dropped a silent marker. Init, flag, dragonfly.key. That wasn't a kill switch. I'm not reckless. It was a mirror, a heartbeat that would start listening for changes no one else could detect, not unless they knew where to look. And they didn't. That was the point. By the time the meeting ended, I had finished migrating the fallback license validators to an isolated sandbox with a biometric handshake. I didn't remove the originals. That's what amateurs do. I just changed the pointers. Let the system keep humming along like nothing happened, until it didn't. Later that day, I got an email from legal asking why there was no updated compliance at attestation for Q2. I told them to check with the CTO. I wasn't being petty, I was being precise. That document was my job 2 months ago. Now? It was a mirror too, reflecting how much they didn't understand what I did until I stopped doing it. Greg didn't respond. The CEO didn't care. "We'll manage," was all he said in the internal Slack channel, followed by a thumbs up emoji. I archived the message, might need that later. I spent the rest of the week cleaning quietly, not deleting, shifting, root keys relocated, log directories mapped elsewhere, default escalation protocols rerouted through a logic gate that required a passphrase only I knew. If you watched from the outside, it looked like a routine maintenance, nothing dramatic, nothing loud. But underneath, the skeleton was moving, reaching, coiling up like a spring. I renamed the last major continuity node Overhead Waito 1, and then I logged out. They moved the board meeting up by a week, probably to finalize which non-essentials they could brag about cutting before the next investor call. I wasn't on the invite. My calendar went blank that morning like I'd already been erased. Cute. But the thing about cleaning up everyone's mess for 7 years is you learn where they hide the keys. So I walked in anyway. Pressed the elevator button with a hand that no longer needed clearance because I had cloned the override token 6 months ago during a firmware update nobody bothered to read. Walked through the double doors at 9:58 a.m. holding a plain manila folder and a coffee I didn't drink. The room went a little too still when they saw me. The CEO looked up, smug as ever, that tech bro smugness that thinks charisma can substitute for backups. Didn't realize this was an open mic? he said. Some chuckles. The chairwoman didn't laugh. Just observing, I replied. My voice was flat, almost bored. I took a seat near the end of the table and placed the folder next to legal. No drama, no spectacle, just presence. That's what rattled them. I was supposed to disappear quietly, not haunt the war room. The CTO gave me a half smile, the kind you reserve for toddlers with plastic knives. We've got continuity handled, Elise. You don't need to worry. Across the room, a junior IT analyst rushed in, whispered into the COO's ear, and scurried out like his shoes were on fire. Someone pulled up a dashboard screen on the wall, uptime metrics jittering. One of the license validators showed a red status for 2 internal nodes, just flickering, blinking like a warning light nobody wants to admit seeing. Looks like a data center hiccup, Greg said quickly. Transient routing issue. Legal opened the folder. She flipped through diagrams, network architecture overlays, failover tree maps, escalation paths, each one annotated in my handwriting. On the last page was a single line typed in 16-pad Arial. All fallback routing and license integrity reside on biometric ID TRAN-E. The room froze for half a beat. The chair turned to me slowly, eyes narrowing. I stood up. You have 8 minutes, I said. No one moved. No one breathed. Then I walked out. Quietly, calmly, left my coffee on the table, still untouched. In the hallway, I passed another IT tech pacing, muttering about external vendor nodes refusing validation. Something about auth resolution errors. Someone was already blaming the new load balancer migration. I didn't stop. Back at my desk, or what used to be mine, I logged in one last time. The heartbeat was pulsing. Dragonfly was awake, and the clock had started. By the time the legal team hit the second diagram in that folder, the COO had already dialed my number twice, straight to voicemail. His fingers twitched like maybe pressing the screen harder would force an answer. It didn't. On the third try, he turned to the HR rep and snapped, "Is her access still active?" She checked, blinked. No, badge was deactivated this morning, per protocol. He cursed under his breath. The CTO tried to play it cool. We can still override the fallback manually. It's just a credential handoff. Legal flipped to the next page. System license dependencies, biometric fallback escrow, keyholder ID, TRAN-E bprint. Auth method, dual factor, local plus biometric. Transfer method, unavailable. The boardroom turned stone silent. It was around that moment the first Slack message from external support pinged the shared screen. Getting license heartbeat failures on Node 7A. Could be cert drift. Please advise. Followed by a second. FYI, client-side license check not resolving an APAC instance. Issue started 15 minutes ago. And a third. Your primary validation node isn't authenticating. Secondary fallback is routing us to a null gateway. Greg opened the admin console, tried to reroute. Denied. Attempted to access the root escalation shell. Denied. Even the dev staging environment was showing timeout errors. He muttered something about DNS loopbacks and slammed the keyboard harder than necessary. The chair leaned forward. Are you telling me that all of our fallback routing is tied to one person? Legal didn't answer, just pointed at the last line again like it was a courtroom exhibit. The COO stood up. Someone find her. He meant physically. As if I were still in the building, waiting to be summoned like some overpaid IT ghost with a hero complex. What he didn't know, what none of them understood, was that I'd disabled my own badge 2 hours earlier, walked out the side door with a smile and no forwarding address. They weren't going to find me in the cafeteria. I was unreachable by design. The vendor pings became more urgent. Client contract dependent on system uptime. SLA breach begins in 12 minutes. The platform's core API began returning 502 errors, just flashes, nothing public yet. But enough to set legal flipping pages faster, the CTO sweating through his undershirt, the CEO asking the same question 3 different ways. What the hell is happening? Someone tried to reboot a server manually. It didn't take. The backup node refused handoff. I had built Dragonfly to be passive until it wasn't. And now it was just watching them spin. The chair finally said it out loud. This wasn't a bluff. Her voice was flat, but her eyes? They were calculating, because they all knew what was next. Panic wasn't the problem. Time was. The CTO cracked first. He stared at the screen like it might start lying for his benefit, then finally muttered it under his breath. She never transferred rollback. Silence. Then Legal turned slowly, voice low and deadly. You signed off on continuity. Greg snapped back. She said it was in process. She told me the protocols were documented. Where? He didn't answer. The audit lead opened the terminal session logs on a separate monitor and scrolled through the last 72 hours. One entry stood out, timestamped the day before at 11:42 p.m. Dragonfly.key initialized no description, no linked deployment record, just a single command issued from Elise's machine under her root access, tagged with her biometric signature. Legal leaned in. What's Dragonfly? No one in the room had an answer. The CEO, finally shaken enough to look like something other than a smug hedge fund haircut, grabbed his laptop and tried logging into the override shell. Denied. He tried again. This time typing slower, like maybe the system needed to feel respected. Still denied. Get someone from IT, now. Already here, someone muttered, pointing at a junior admin in the corner who looked like he might vomit. She took herself off all override groups 6 weeks ago. Escalation roles are tied to biometrics. We can't impersonate the key. It's not a password. It's a fingerprint. Try rolling back via backup node, the CEO barked. Already tried, the admin said, voice cracking. The nodes are live, but they're not accepting token sync. It's like they don't believe we're who we say we are. The platform was still online. Barely. API calls were returning at 30% reliability. Vendor integrations were throwing validation errors across 3 regions. The lead client in Singapore had already escalated, a $4.8 monthly contract hinging on seamless uptime, now stalling. Investor, call in 15, someone whispered. The chair just stared at the screen, motionless. Then it got worse. One of the compliance auditors opened a tab and pulled up the cyber insurance policy tied to the platform. The clause was clear. Payouts in the event of operational disruption were only valid if the company maintained up-to-date continuity logs, incident protocols, and failover documentation. Those logs, those policies, all housed in a single encrypted vault, owned and maintained by Elise Tran. No access, no backups, no escrow. The vault's multi-factor required her biometric unlock, plus a passphrase she never disclosed. And because the board rejected her retention plan last quarter, there was no alternate custodian. The CTO tried to deflect. This can't be legal. She can't hold the company hostage. Legal didn't even look up. She offered knowledge transfer. You declined. The room dissolved into movement. Calls, whispers, frantic key tapping, everyone trying to solve a system they'd spent years ignoring. Greg sweating through his shirt, the CEO pacing like a caged raccoon, the chair unmoving except her eyes. They never left the clock. 14 minutes, and counting. The clock was eating itself. 12 minutes to the investor call. 4 regions reporting cascading failures. API health charts blinking like ICU monitors. The CFO looked pale. Someone in legal started whispering about material non-disclosure risk and trigger clauses in the funding round paperwork. Nobody was breathing normally anymore. Then, from the far end of the table, the youngest board member, the one who hadn't spoken all morning, lifted his phone and said, "Just call her." Dead silence. The chair's eyes narrowed. Legal looked uncertain, but nodded. They dialed. Voicemail. The room held its breath. A minute later, a text pinged the board line. Elise's number. Only speak with the chair. Just that. No pleasantries. No panic. The chair excused herself without a word, stood, and left the room with the phone pressed to her ear. The rest of the board waited like a jury waiting for sentencing. The CEO started pacing again, muttering half-threats to nobody in particular. The CTO kept clicking the same refresh button like the outcome might change if he just tried harder. 10 minutes. The chair returned 6 minutes later. Her face didn't give a damn thing away. She placed her tablet on the table, opened an email, and read it aloud like scripture. Elise Tran has offered the following terms. Full reinstatement. Title, Executive custodian of continuity. Direct report to the chair only. No intermediary chain. Immediate restoration of all credentials. Biometric license escrow remains exclusively in her possession. Someone gasped. Another email pinged. She continued. Addendum. No organizational changes to platform operations, continuity, vendor access, or credentials without Elise Tran's written approval. Violations trigger immediate revocation of license routing access. Retainer. $1.2 million annually. 3-year minimum. Greg practically exploded. That's blackmail. The chair didn't blink. That's leverage. She can't hold the entire infrastructure ransom. She offered you the map, legal said, voice cold. You torched it. The CEO stood, red in the face, fists clenched. This is a joke. You won't decide. The chair interrupted. Then she signed. A silent, collective exhale filled the room. The junior board member nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Someone in IT whispered, her keys syncing. And across the system dashboard, the red nodes began to flicker. Not off, but green. She didn't knock, didn't ask for permission, didn't wait for the door to open from the inside. Elise walked into the boardroom like she was returning a borrowed stapler, not reclaiming the spine of a $295 million platform. No words, just that same calm, clinical focus she'd always carried like a tool belt nobody saw. Her clothes were plain, black slacks, gray sweater, hair up, no makeup, no need. She set a single UB key on the table, leaned down, and plugged it into the backup terminal. Click. One light on the console flickered amber, then green. The room held its breath. Command lines began scrolling, authentication handshakes firing in sequence. The dev environment blinked back to life. Routing tables synchronized, vendor nodes reconnected, failover proxies reauthorized. One by one, like dominoes tipping upright. Greg let out a noise between a choke and a sob as the API health dashboard surged to 97% stability. Slack lit up again. Vendor support. Auth validated. Systems restored. Thanks for the rapid response. Tell your continuity lead. Quarter saved. Elise didn't smile, didn't nod. She just stood there, hands clasped in front of her, watching the screen like a surgeon confirming vitals post-op. The CEO, desperate to salvage something, cleared his throat and unmuted the investor call, his voice slick and snake-oiled. We had a minor hiccup, but I want to emphasize how quickly our team responded. Mute him, the chair said. A second later, silence. She turned to the board. We're proceeding to a motion. The room straightened. Effective immediately, she said, voice firm. I move to accept the resignation of our chief executive officer. He opened his mouth to protest. The CFO was already raising her hand. The junior board member followed. Legal, compliance, one by one, a clean sweep. The CEO stared at Elise, like she'd betrayed him, like he didn't remember calling her overhead. She didn't look back. He stood. No one said goodbye. Security would handle the rest. Elise turned and walked out just as silently as she came in. The system was stable. The platform was safe. The board was functional again. For now, no speech, no fanfare, just that simple, terrifying elegance of someone who never needed a stage to pull strings. Downstairs, in the vendor Slack, someone had already updated the contact of record. Elise Tran, custodian of continuity. She never came back to the daily meetings, didn't show up on Slack channels, didn't attend roadmap stand-ups. Her calendar was invisible, her office reassigned. Some intern tried to claim her old desk once, and IT quietly told them no. Just no. No further explanation. She wasn't gone. She was above it. Her new title wasn't announced in a press release. There was no welcome back donut spread or LinkedIn cheerleading. Just a silent system update. Permissions restructured, access logs rewritten. She now reported directly, exclusively, to the chair. Executive custodian of continuity. No org chart placement. No dotted lines, no dotted questions. A year passed. The platform posted record uptime. 3 failed acquisitions from competitors trying to reverse engineer her work. Investors stopped asking about infrastructure risk altogether. Even the insurance underwriters adjusted the premiums down. People stopped asking who kept the lights on. because the lights never flickered again. At the annual keynote, during the COO's segment on resilience, he deviated from the script. Briefly, uncharacteristically, he said, "We've built a system where every node, every service, every credential has backups." Then paused. Except one. The room laughed politely. He didn't. "She's the single point of trust." He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Downstairs, in the main lobby of the building, a new plaque had been installed that month, right beneath the etched names of early investors, right above the visitor sign-in kiosk. It didn't list a title. It didn't need context. Just 2 words, in brushed steel. Overhead. Huh? Some costs are called overhead. Others are called backbone.